Home alone with a book. 20-year-old Max always enjoyed spending time alone. His parents had gone away for the weekend to visit friends, leaving him in their big country house. The evening was quiet, with rain tapping on the windows and the wind rustling the tree branches outside. Max decided to spend the time reading a book his friend had recommended. It was a detective novel called Shadows of the Past. He wrapped himself in a blanket, sat in a chair by the fireplace, and started reading. The book was gripping. It told the story of a series of murders in a small town, and each chapter ended on a suspenseful note. Max got so immersed in the story that he lost track of time. But then, suddenly, he heard a noise. Something had fallen upstairs. Max froze for a moment. He knew the house was empty. His parents wouldn't be back for 2 more days. He put the book down and listened carefully. Again, he heard something, footsteps. He grabbed his phone to call his parents, but there was no signal. The storm must have damaged the lines. Max decided to go upstairs, holding a baseball bat in his hand. The footsteps seemed to be coming from his parents' bedroom. He opened the door and froze. A man wearing a mask was sitting on the bed. He held a knife and stared directly at Max. "You shouldn't have come in here," the man said, his voice calm but threatening. Max started backward, slamming the door shut. He heard the man laugh and then footsteps getting closer. Max ran to his room, locked the door, and wedged a chair against it. He tried calling the police, but his phone was dead. Suddenly, he noticed something on the floor, a note that hadn't been there before. It read, "You're next." A cold chill ran through Max. He remembered the book he had been reading. In it, the killer left notes for his victims. He opened the book randomly and saw that the next chapter was titled "The Final Step." His heart raced. He realized this wasn't just a coincidence. Max decided to hide in the basement. He ran to the stairs but suddenly remembered he'd left the book in his room. He went back, but the book was gone. Instead, there was a knife on the floor, similar to the one the man in the mask had been holding. Max heard footsteps outside the door. He grabbed the knife and ran to the basement. There, he found an old chest he had never opened before. Inside were photographs, pictures of him. On the back of each was a date, as if someone had been watching him. The last photo was taken today, while he was reading the book. Max stood frozen, holding the book. His mind raced, piecing things together. The book had been given to him by Jake, a friend he'd met a few months ago. Jake had always seemed a bit odd, but Max had never paid it much attention. They'd gone for coffee together, talked about books, and Jake often mentioned how important it was to unravel the mysteries of life. Now, those words took on a sinister meaning. Max tried calling Jake, but his phone was dead. Suddenly, he heard a voice from upstairs. "Max, are you there?" It was Jake's voice. Max felt a wave of relief, but then he remembered the photos in the chest. His heart raced. He didn't answer, holding his breath. The voice continued. "I know you're there. You read the book, didn't you? It's about you." Max felt panic rise in his chest. He realized the book wasn't just entertainment. It was the key to something much bigger. He flipped through the pages, searching for clues, and suddenly his eyes landed on one line. "Sometimes, the darkest secrets are hidden in those you know best." Max decided to get out of the basement. He remembered an old tunnel that led to the shed. His dad had told him it was built by his grandfather, but no one had used it. Max crawled through the narrow passage, feeling the walls press in on him. When he finally emerged outside, he saw his parents' car. It was empty, but the keys were still in the ignition. Max felt a sense of relief. Maybe he could escape. He got in the car and tried to start the engine, but then he heard a knock on the trunk. His heart stopped. He got out of the car and carefully opened the trunk. Inside were his parents. They were tied up, their mouths taped shut, their eyes full of fear. Max rushed to them, trying to free them, but then he heard a voice behind him. "You shouldn't have left." Max turned around. It was Jake. He was holding a gun and smiling, but the smile was cold and soulless. "Why are you doing this?" Max asked, his voice trembling. "Because you're next," Jake replied. "This is a game, Max. And you're part of it." Jake explained that it was all part of his game. He didn't belong to any group, wasn't involved with cults or criminals. This was his own game, a game he created just for Max. "You've always loved puzzles," Jake said, moving closer. "I'm just giving you the chance to play the most interesting one." Max realized his only chance was to outsmart Jake. He remembered the knife he had taken from the basement. When Jake got closer, Max lunged at him. They fell to the ground, fighting for the gun. Jake was stronger, but Max fought desperately. He thought of his parents, still trapped in the trunk, and that gave him strength. Suddenly, the gun went off. Jake froze. He looked at Max in disbelief, as if he couldn't believe it had ended this way. Then he fell to the ground, and Max saw the blood on his chest. Max freed his parents, and they left the house together. When they got to the police station, Max realized Jake was gone. There was no blood, no trace of him where he had fallen. The police found no evidence of his existence. Max returned home a few days later. On the doorstep was the book. He opened it to the last page. It read, "The game is not over." Max could never forget that night. He knew Jake was out there, waiting. And the game continued.